everyone. Today we're going to talk about VSEPR theory. A reminder, Lewis structures are 2D models that we use to show where the electrons that participate in bonding or that are part of the valence set and don't participate are located on an atom or molecule. While Lewis structures reveal a lot of information, they do have one weakness. Our world is three-dimensional while they are two-dimensional. And so we must consider a different theory in order to account for what the genuine three-dimensional shapes look like. The theory that predicts what the three-dimensional shapes of molecules looks like is called VSEPR theory. This stands for valence shell electron pair repulsion. What basically happens here is that electrons repel each other because like charges repel. Therefore, the orbitals where electrons are housed, in order to help minimize this repulsion, will try to arrange themselves so that they are as far away from each other as possible while in three-dimensional space. This means that they will take unusual angles for bond angles that you might not predict if you're only using two-dimensional Lewis structures. How you determine the molecular geometry of a shape is, first, you have to have a Lewis structure, either drawn or found. And second, you must count the number and type of electron domains on the central atom of your molecule. A domain is a location where pairs of electrons are located. For example, the nitrogen that is central to ammonia has 4 domains on it, 3 of them belonging to the 3 single bonds to the 3 hydrogens, and 1 additional one for the lone pair of electrons that is also on the nitrogen. A quick note, double and triple bonds count as a single domain. For example, if you consider carbon dioxide, CO2, it has 2 double bonds, 1 to each oxygen. Therefore, the central carbon of carbon dioxide only has 2 domains, 1 for each of the double bonds that is present on it. If a molecule has 2 domains, regardless of what kind of domains they are, the shape of that molecule will be linear. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is the carbon dioxide mentioned on the previous slide. The central carbon here has only 2 domains, one to a double bond to oxygen and the other also a double bond to oxygen. Therefore, the way that the domains will arrange themselves and the orbitals will arrange themselves is 180 degrees, or in a linear shape, away from each other. We are now at 3 domains. The ideal bond angle here is 120 degrees. The easiest way to arrange the 3 domains is to spread them out to the corners of an equilateral triangle. However, the molecular geometry name will change depending upon what is in those domains. So if all 3 domains are bonding, aka if there are no lone pairs present on the central atom, the name for that shape is trigonal planar. An example of a molecule that takes the trigonal planar shape is boron trihydride, whose structure is shown to the top right. However, if one of the 3 domains is a lone pair, then the name for this molecular shape will be bent. An example of something that takes this shape is the nitrite ion, NO2 with a -1 charge, which is also shown on the bottom right. You'll notice it still has 3 domains, a lone pair, a single bond, and a double bond. However, if you were to draw it out in a similar way to the boron trihydride, yes, you would still have the 3 domains pointed at a triangle, but the lone pairs don't show up when you try to look at it usually. So you're left with an angle or bent shape. For 4 domains, the ideal bond angle is 109.5 degrees, which is one of the most unusual bond angles we're going to see for the molecules we look at today. For 4 domains, there are 3 possible molecular geometries, which again depend on how many lone pairs are present for the molecule. If none of the domains consists of a lone pair, aka they are all bonding, then the name of the molecular geometry is tetrahedral. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is methane, CH4, whose Lewis structure is shown at the top right. If one of the domains is a lone pair, then the name for the shape is trigonal pyramidal. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is ammonia, NH3, whose Lewis structure is shown at the bottom left. If 2 of the domains are lone pairs, then the name for the molecular geometry is bent. You'll notice this is a repeat name. There are two different kinds of bent molecules, but both have the same idea of a central molecule with what looks like an angle when you look at the molecule from above to the other two things attached. An example of a molecule that takes this kind of bent shape is water, H2O, whose Lewis structure is shown at the bottom right. For 5 domains, there are a lot of possibilities. In a 5-domain molecule, there are 2 different bond angles that take place because there are 2 different components to this shape. There is a trigonal plane that is in the middle, quote unquote, of the molecule, and the 3 atoms or domains who are in this location will have approximately 120 degrees between them. There will also be a perpendicular pair compared to that trigonal plane, and between one of those perpendicular pairs and a member of the plane, there is a 90-degree angle. So there are 4 possible shapes here. If none of the domains are bonding, then the name of the molecular geometry is trigonal bipyramidal. You'll notice this name sounds very familiar because we mentioned earlier there is a trigonal pyramidal shape. You'll notice many of the names have repeating parts, although they are different structures. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is phosphorus pentafluoride, whose Lewis structure is shown for the top left of the Lewis structures on this slide. You'll notice at this point there are now 5 domains, which means the central atom will be forced to break its octet at this point. This is true for all 4 of the Lewis structures shown on this slide. If one of the 5 domains is a lone pair, the name for this molecular geometry is seesaw or teeter-totter shaped, depending upon what region you live in. An example of something that has the seesaw shape is sulfur tetrafluoride, whose Lewis structure is shown in the bottom left of this slide. If two of the domains are lone pairs, then the name of the molecular geometry is T-shaped. You're left with one of the molecules from the trigonal plane and the 2 who are on the axes, which results in a T-shaped molecule. The Lewis structure for an example molecule of this, bromine trifluoride, is shown in the top right of the Lewis structures on this slide. If 3 of the domains are lone pairs, which means that the 3 domains in the trigonal plane are now replaced with lone pairs, the name for the molecule is linear, another repeat name. The only domains that now contain atoms are those who are on that perpendicular axis we mentioned before. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is xenon difluoride. For 6 domains, all the bond angles between atoms or domains in this region will now be 90 degrees. There are 3 possible molecular geometries when you have 6 domains. If none of the domains are lone pairs, then the name for the shape is octahedral. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is sulfur hexafluoride, whose Lewis dot structure is shown to the left of the 3 that are shown on this slide. If one of the domains is a lone pair, that means that the name of the shape is now square pyramidal. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is bromine pentafluoride, whose Lewis structure is shown at the top right of the 3 on this slide. If 2 of these domains are lone pairs, then it is square planar. An example of a molecule that takes this shape is xenon tetrafluoride. You will notice that here again there are 6 domains, which means the central atom has 12 electrons around it in bonds or lone pairs at a minimum. This means that for anything with 6 domains, once again, like there was with 5, the central atom must be breaking its octet in order to take one of these shapes. Important thing to note, there are 2 different kinds of geometries we usually mention, electron geometry and molecular geometry. The previous slides have talked about the molecular geometry. It refers to the specific shape of the molecule. In order to look at the shape of the molecule, we have to look at where the bonding and non-bonding domains are, aka which domains consist of bonds and which ones consist of lone pairs. To look at the shape, we generally look at just where the bonding ones are, although the lone pairs will dictate what the bond angles are. For electron geometry, we are specifically just looking at the arrangement of the domains without concern for what kind of domain they are. So generally, when you cite an electron geometry, you are citing the name of one of the molecular geometries that does not have lone pairs associated with it. So for example, any molecule that has 4 domains has an electron geometry of tetrahedral, regardless of what its actual molecular geometry is. Generally speaking, electron geometry is talked about when you are discussing bond angles or if you are going to discuss the hybridization for an atom. We will discuss hybridization in a later video.